How did a simple deck of playing cards printed with beautiful and elegant illustrations lead to underground gambling, organised crime, and the foundation of one of the world's largest video game companies? Well, I'm Wheels from Dicebreaker, and this is the history of Hanafuda. It's the 1500s, and the insular island nation of Japan is in the midst of a bloody civil war. The Sengoku Jidai, or Warring States period, was a time of near chaos for the serving classes of a feudal system on the brink of collapse, as powerful daimyo families sought to lay their claim on the throne. But amongst all this chaos, in the year 1543, a Portuguese trading ship is blown off course, carrying some of the first Europeans to ever set foot on Japan's shores, to the island of Tanegashima, just south of Kyushu. This was just the start of what would end up being centuries of Western influence on the political makeup and technological advancement of Japan and her people. And whilst there were all sorts of genuinely life-changing inventions that Japanese citizens were being introduced to by the Portuguese traders, who were now setting up colonies and trading posts on Japan's shores, there was a strange stack of illustrated cards that we're going to be focusing on today. These strange cards that the Portuguese traders were playing games with were an early variation of what we now know as the standard 52 playing card deck. The version that likely made its way into Japan would be more familiar to modern audiences as a tarot deck's minor arcana. 4 suits of swords, cups, coins and clubs would range in numerical value and see knights, knaves and kings at the top of each suit. Around this time, the deck only consisted of about 48 cards, but would be used for similar games to the ones that we play today, focusing on trick-taking and gambling. As trade with Western nations became more prevalent and knowledge of the cards would spread throughout Japan, it wouldn't be long before decks were being made by Japanese people themselves. These first Japanese decks, made during the Tensho period, mimicked the makeup of the Portuguese decks that they were based on, with a visual style and organisation that better fit the new Japanese audience, and are now commonly referred to as Tensho Karuta. And for quite a few decades, these cards would grow in popularity, becoming more and more of a household item for those that could afford to purchase them or make their own set, with regional games being created and the playing card deck entering Japan's national lexicon. That was, of course, until the Edo period, as the Tokugawa shogunate's iron grip sought to eliminate Western interference from their now subjugated island nation. It's the 17th century, and Japan is in a new state of unification, seeking to suppress social unrest in this once war-torn country, now finally acting as one nation. Or at least they were supposed to be, anyway. After years and years of outside influence from Christian Europeans, Western culture and practices were starting to become normalised and accepted in those spots closest to foreign trading ports, with many Japanese nationals even converting to Christianity. Meanwhile, the Tokugawa shogunate become more and more oppressive in their reign, with harsh penalties of beheading, death by boiling, and even crucifixion seemingly being doled out for even the most minor of offences. The shogunate were not big fans of Euro-Christian influence, and the effect it was having on their sovereignty and culture. With Christianity now seen as a threat, though, this led to a lot of punishment being thrown at those who had converted or done the conversions themselves, and after a Christian-led Shimabara rebellion in 1638, Christianity was completely outlawed in the country. It wasn't long before the third Tokugawa shogun Iemitsu enacted the Sakoku isolationist policy. No one could come into or out of Japan's borders without express permission from the shogunate. There were to be no more European trading posts save for a single port on the island of Dejima, where only the Dutch could import goods, and under strict surveillance. Japanese people would not be allowed to craft ocean-going vessels. Foreign books were banned from import. The shogunate refused to allow outsiders to influence the culture and politics of the nation. With this fierce crackdown on Western imports came a crackdown on any objects associated with them as well, including those decks of Karuta playing cards that were officially outlawed in 1648. It was here that the Hanafuda decks as we know them today would properly start to form. By this point, gambling with playing cards was very popular amongst the citizens of Japan, to the extent that it was quite difficult to crack down on. Officers enforcing the law would look for certain card designs that they associated with those original Portuguese playing cards and confiscate them. But in response, underground gamblers would produce cards with different designs to try and obfuscate what they were playing. This led to an almost slapstick level of back and forth between gamblers creating new designs that would then become popular enough for law enforcers to recognize them, which led to a new design becoming popular, and so on and so forth, until eventually we come to these gorgeous and abstract designs that are still being printed today. Unlike Western playing cards, the values of the suits are hidden amongst the designs of what to the innocent eye seem just like small illustrations, almost like postcards. By learning those designs though, you'll see that the cards are split into 12 different suits, matching the months of the year. Each suit is represented by the flora and fauna associated with those months, which is where the modern name of Hanafuda originates, roughly translating to flower cards. We can look at March, for example, and see the famous Japanese cherry blossoms blooming, or in August where the autumnal Japanese maple leaves gently drift down the cards. Each of the 4 cards in a suit will then have varying scores based on the contents of their illustrations, with simple flowers scoring 1 point, these paper strips scoring 5, and so on. But those scores and how those cards are used will vary depending on the game that you're playing. If you're playing Koi Koi, one of the more popular Hanafuda games that has survived to this day and resembles a Western game of poker, then even further sets can be made. All the red poetry Tanzaku cards, all 4 of 1 suit, all single point cards, and so on. The name Koi Koi is actually a taunt used to signal that you want to double or nothing your winnings after finishing a set and taking a round. That is basically the Japanese version of come and have a go if you think you're hard enough. The versatility in the deck and all the different games that it led to are what made these cards so popular, and what also prompted those using them in the shady back alleys and private games throughout the country to continue to adapt them and avoid detection with the intricate visuals on the cards. But with private illicit games comes gambling, and with gambling comes money, which pretty much always leads to crime. Here's a fun tidbit. One of the popular gambling games that could be played with Japanese playing cards was Oicho Kabu, and although it's designed for Kabufuda cards, you can play with Hanafuda by simply removing the last 2 months. In Oicho Kabu, sort of like Baccarat, you'll draw 3 cards hoping to score as high as possible. But if you ever go over 9, then your score will equal whatever the smallest number in your total figure. So if you scored 15, for example, you'd only actually score 5. One of the worst hands you can draw is an 8, 9, and a 3 equaling 20, which is effectively scoring 0 points. In Japanese, Yatsu-ku-san can be sort of phonetically bastardized into Yakuza, meaning no score, low life, and eventually gangster. It's not entirely clear where the organised crime syndicates of the Yakuza we now know of today originated, but in Edo period Japan, there were 2 wings of criminality that are thought to have been some of the first instances of their operations. The Tekiya, who were essentially dodgy merchants peddling illicit stolen or counterfeit goods, and more importantly for us, the Bakuto, who were involved heavily in gambling. The Bakuto would set up shop in towns and on highways, sometimes even in collusion with local governments, as a way of siphoning labourers' earnings back into their hands. It was also the Bakuto that originated the tradition of huge, elaborate tattoos on the backs of their members, often resembling the very Hanafuda cards that they were playing with. The gamblers would play at the table shirtless, almost as an advertisement to those in the know. To this day, tattoos are very looked down upon in Japan, as they're often associated with criminality, with many Japanese bathhouses around the country still banning those with tattoos from entry to this day. The Bakuto and subsequently the Yakuza have long been associated with Kyushu Island, often regarded as the largest source of their members and its activities in the origins of the gangs, just a stone's throw from the original landing point of that first Portuguese trading ship. Fast forward to the year 1889, and craftsman Fusajiro Yamauchi founds a playing card manufacturing company in Kyoto, Japan. Gambling was banned in almost all forms from the year 1882, as it's always the case when you make something illegal, it still carries on outside of the state's eyes. The Yakuza are now heavily affiliated with all forms of gambling and player cards, and despite the production and sale of Hanafuda cards being a perfectly legal act, a lot of retailers were worried about the connotations of selling things that were predominantly used by dangerous organised criminals. Unswayed by the dangers to his public image, Yamauchi names his brand new playing card company Nintendo Karuta, with the express purpose of making and selling Hanafuda cards, and within a few years become the largest manufacturer thereof. The phrase Nintendo is often assumed to mean leave luck to heaven, fitting the company's gaming image, but an alternative translation can be read as the Temple of Free Hanafuda. Whilst the company saw its fair share of financial troubles over its turbulent first few decades in business, with wars, slow and expensive manufacturing processes, and a new playing card tax which halted the production of Western-style playing cards that they were planning to introduce years later, but with continued and substantial effort, the company continued to grow, eventually even pairing with Walt Disney to release card sets featuring Disney's animated characters. This generally led to the company focusing more on the children's toy market, especially after the sale of Hanafuda cards began to go out of fashion, with gambling alternatives like pachinko beginning to rise in popularity, an industry that still dominates Japan today. With their original star product falling in profitability and the once lucrative deal with Disney falling out of favour with the purchasing public, the Nintendo Playing Card Company, as it was now known, pushed outside of its comfort zone and began to invest in businesses far from their usual wheelhouse, including instant rice, a taxi service, and even a chain of love hotels, which, if you're not familiar with, you can Google on your own time. None of those business ventures really took off, with the taxi service being the only real beam of sunlight, quickly snuffed out by disputes with local drivers' unions. With a business on the verge of collapse and the only real saving grace their newfound specialty for manufacturing electronic devices, with their first ever electronic toy releasing in the 1970s, a watershed moment for the company, this led them to focus hard on what would soon become their video game production wing, leading to the absolute gaming powerhouse that is modern day Nintendo. It is almost baffling to think of the now super clean, family-friendly cartoon company that is Nintendo being a primary source for organised criminal gangs to buy their gambling cards from, but even today you can grab yourself a deck of Nintendo Hanafuda cards, even ones with Mario and friends adorning the illustrations. These beautiful little cards are a fascinating piece of history to hold in your hands, and if you're ever looking to try some card games from another culture, I definitely recommend picking up a set of your own. Well, there you have it. From lost traders to rapid redesigns, criminal gangs to It's-a-me Mario, Hanafuda has an incredibly storied past. Let us know what interested you the most in the comments about their history, and maybe even drop some interesting facts about them yourselves. Whilst you're here, have you subscribed to Dicebreaker? We've got all sorts of interesting deep dives into tabletop gaming and beyond right here on the channel, and you can hit the bell icon to get notified whenever we put a new video live. Hit join if you want to support the channel even further with a subscription in exchange for exclusive videos and rewards, and make sure to visit dicebreaker.com for even more fascinating articles on the board games we know and love today. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one, but until then, have a lovely day.